China and the US are going all in on their newest trade war. Ukraine captures Chinese troops fighting for Russia on the front lines. And the island country of Palau is deporting Chinese criminals. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. You probably know the companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never heard of, and you have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps stop them. I'll explain more at the end. The Israeli government has quietly approved a major expansion of the Chinese-operated portion of the Haifa Bay port. This is according to an Israeli government press release analysis by Open Source Intel, an Israeli media and news company. Wow, Israel doing something many people will find controversial and want to criticize? Wow, it's so out of character. The port sits just over 1 mile away from Israel's most sensitive naval base. It's co-run by the Chinese state-owned Shanghai International Port Group, or SIPG, and India's Adani ports. But this new regulation gives the Chinese side permission to expand its operation at the port from 2 to 4 platforms. Back in 2019, the Trump administration warned that the Chinese company's presence could complicate U.S. naval operations in the area, since the U.S. Navy pulls into Haifa on occasion. But it's okay. I mean, it's not like Israel is massively reliant on the U.S. for military aid or anything. Back then, former American and Israeli defense and intelligence officials warned about Chinese-made cranes and embedded communication devices, or other potential forms of espionage. The new regulations, which are being framed as logistics reform, are reigniting concerns in both Jerusalem and Washington. China's support for Iran and its proxy groups only make this an even larger concern, especially since Israel is currently at war with them. Israeli officials have said that the expansion is part of a contract they're stuck in from 2014, and that they're instituting quote-unquote draconian measures to contain the Chinese influence at the port and keep out Chinese surveillance. Haifa is part of the Trump administration's proposed India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. So this might complicate things a bit. But hey, it wouldn't be a story about Israel if it wasn't extremely complicated. The first ever EU Central Asia Summit is meeting in the Uzbek capital of Samarkand, with the main goal being diversifying from Russia and China. I'm no financial expert, but I can confidently advise you to try to limit the amount of violent invading authoritarians in your portfolio. The meeting includes Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission and European Council President Antonio Costa, as well as the STANs, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, the #1 exporter of potassium. Central Asia is rich in resources, but typically has been dominated by China or Russia. The European Union also has had differences with the region over human rights issues, which China and Russia have been able to look past for some reason. But now, amidst global trade tensions and the Belt and Road Initiative's lackluster results in places like Kyrgyzstan, these countries are looking for more investment in their infrastructure and industries, while Europe is looking for energy and critical raw materials partnerships. Both sides say that they're merely broadening their trade options, not seeking to replace or seriously challenge Beijing or Moscow. Though this does feel like your partner saying, I want to try an open relationship for a while. You're not breaking up, but it won't be long until you do. Speaking of Beijing and Moscow, Ukraine has captured 2 Chinese nationals fighting for Russia. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, the 2 men were fighting in the eastern Donbas region. Wow, first North Korean soldiers, now Chinese ones. Just gotta keep that meat grinder full. Russia hasn't commented on the troops' capture, but predictably China has said it is verifying the information with authorities in Kiev and that it always urges its citizens to stay away from conflict zones. Yes, because this is totally just a random Chinese civilian that accidentally wandered into a war zone. Not a reason to question the CCP's alleged neutrality in the war. China's foreign ministry came back demanding that Ukraine stop making irresponsible statements about Chinese soldiers in the country. Because again, total civilian, not a soldier. The spokeswoman for the U.S. State Department confirmed that the White House is aware of the situation and called both North Korea and China's involvement disturbing. She also noted that China is a major enabler of the Kremlin's illegal war and underscored the Trump administration's efforts to broker peace. And, asked on behalf of Vice President J.D. Vance that they say thank you. The small South Pacific island country of Palau is deporting Chinese criminals on an unprecedented scale for such a tiny nation, thus reinforcing Indo-Pacific security. The tiny republic made up of over 300 islands has been a thorn in the CCP's side for a long time, partially due to its strategic location, but also because it recognizes Taiwan and is a close U.S. ally under U.S. protection. Despite this, Chinese criminal organizations had a nasty habit of setting up shop in the country after getting tourist visas. So in December of last year, Palau fought back with Presidential Directive 2465, designed to deal with the problem of allowing Palau's National Security Coordinator to vet all visa applications. Shortly after it came into force, 65 out of 80 Chinese visa applications were denied, far higher than applications from any other country in the region. Several non-resident worker applications were also denied, and high-profile Chinese criminals were rounded up and deported. So it looks like there are some in the South Pacific who are starting to stand up to Chinese influence. Speaking of which, Honduras is looking to re-enter Taiwanese markets. Honduras used to recognize Taiwan, but switched its allegiance to Beijing 2 years ago, hoping to benefit from a Chinese free trade agreement. Instead, the CCP chose to dump goods into the Honduran market, which led to a huge trade imbalance. This is my surprise face. The Secretary of Affairs said that after losing the Taiwanese market, the country has suffered economically. For example, according to data from the National Association of Honduran Aquaculturists, or ANDAH, just 2 years after Honduras cut ties with Taiwan, its white shrimp exports have plummeted 67%, leaving more than 14,000 workers unemployed. During the switch from Taiwan to China, Chinese businesses pledged to buy large amounts of the shrimp, but they ultimately only bought 1 container's worth, leading the ANDAH to label the CCP rude and disgusting, which perfectly describes the Chinese Communist Party, the only party where you're mad when someone doesn't eat all the shrimp. And after the break, Trump declares a trade war on China and Xi's trying to fight back. Welcome back. The U.S. has sanctioned 6 Chinese and Hong Kong officials over rights abuses. The sanctions were imposed due to transnational repression in Hong Kong, acts that threaten to weaken what little autonomy the city has left, and according to the U.S. State Department, using Hong Kong's national security laws extraterritorially to intimidate, silence, and harass 19 pro-democracy activists, including a U.S. citizen and 4 other U.S. residents. Really, this is something the Biden administration should have done ages ago. These so-called national security laws claim to prevent terrorism and radicalism, but actually just push Hong Kong under the CCP's radicalized and terroristic boot. Hong Kong Justice Secretary Paul Lam, Security Office Director Dong Jingwei, and Police Commissioner Raymond Siu were among those sanctioned. Lam accused the U.S. of bullying and declared that sanctions will not impact him in any way. As far as the bullying charge, takes one to know one. The Hong Kong Office of China's Foreign Ministry condemned the sanctions as U.S. interference in internal affairs and as part of a scheme to undermine Hong Kong's prosperity. Beijing is threatening now to retaliate as soon as they're done undermining Hong Kong's prosperity. Taiwanese police have tracked fake bomb threats targeting Shen Yun to a Huawei institute in China. This is my surprised face. If they don't stop shocking me like this, I'm going to get wrinkles. According to FalunInfo.net, since March of last year, Shen Yun Performances, its headquarters, and other Falun Gong practitioners have been targeted with over 80 anonymous threats of violence, including graphic depictions of bombings, shootings, and sexual assault. With the performers touring Taiwan, at least 13 new threats appeared, spurring the Taiwanese police to investigate. The perpetrators used foreign VPNs, but Taiwan cyber units were still able to discover their true location at the Huawei Institute in Xi'an. Other recent death threats and bomb threats towards Taiwanese film screenings or government officials in Taipei have also been found to have originated in Xi'an. So this is definitely a targeted campaign. I'd call the CCP trolls, but trolls live under bridges, and they know that's not a safe place to hang out in China. Meanwhile, China has some threats of its own to worry about. U.S. President Donald Trump has practically declared a trade war on Beijing, including the tariffs and secondary tariffs he declared earlier this year. The Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs on China amounted to a total of 54% tariffs on Chinese exports to the U.S. And now those tariffs on Chinese goods are up to 125%, even as Trump announced a 90-day negotiating period for new trade deals with the rest of the world. This has effectively singled China out as Washington's primary trade enemy and turned cheap Chinese crap into wildly expensive cheap crap, arguably the worst type of crap. Initially, Xi Jinping retaliated with a total 84% tariff on American exports to China. Spain even floated the idea of the EU pivoting to China to counter U.S. tariffs. Clearly, CCP propaganda about cooperating with other countries against Trump worked somewhere, though I don't know how much advice on self-preservation I'd take from a nation whose idea of a good time is getting chased by bulls. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has warned that any country siding with China would be cutting their own throat. The CCP wasn't done retaliating, however. Even before the tariffs made it to 125%, it filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization against the U.S. for the measures, issued a travel risk alert for its citizens visiting the U.S., added 12 American tech firms to its export control list, and then designated 6 American high-tech companies as unreliable. Meanwhile, the U.S. made more threats about taking back the Panama Canal from Chinese influence, which led the CCP to accuse the U.S. of blackmail over the issue. Because as we all know, the country that's constantly encroaching on other nations' territories, whose sole mission is to destroy the U.S., who's finally waking up and fighting back, they're the real victims here. But this hasn't ended up working so well for the CCP, since this week the dollar reached its strongest level against the yuan in 18 years. And Chinese and Hong Kong stock markets fell to record lows as the yuan collapsed to its weakest position in 2 years. And some want to go even further.
104% tariffs on China are not enough. I'm advocating 400%. I do business in China. They don't play by the rules. They've been in the WTO for decades. They have never abided by any of the rules they agreed to when they came in for decades. They cheat, they steal IP. I can't litigate in their courts. Xi can only stay the supreme leader if people are employed. It's time to squeeze Chinese heads into the wall now.
The U.S. also says that amidst the trade war, the potential deal to sell TikTok to an American company is off the table for the foreseeable future and maybe forever. This was just days after Trump extended the TikTok ban deadline for the second time. Meanwhile, Apple sent 5 cargo planes full of iPhones to the U.S. to beat the tariff deadline, with each plane capable of holding over 1 million phones. The company is also planning to source more iPhones from India. Amazon also halted select inventory orders from China. And as of yesterday, President Trump raised tariffs to a total of 145% on Chinese exports to the U.S., working as intended. No one knows where this will go, even though President Trump has said he hopes a deal can be made with Xi. But one thing is for certain, the trade war is on, and with all the moving parts, it's more complicated than a story about Israel. Now, I got a video I want to show you that you're going to love, so hold on. But first, this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Whenever you do anything online or use apps on your phones, there are tons of companies that collect your personal data. I'm talking name, social security number, home address, employment history, all sorts of things you might not want to be public knowledge. When I signed up for Incogni 3 years ago, I discovered there were dozens of data brokers that potentially had my private information without my permission. This was terrifying. So, what did I do? I've been getting as many of these companies as possible to delete my data from their systems. I did it using Incogni, and you can too. Incogni has already gotten my details removed from 503 of these data brokers who've collected my info, and I didn't have to do anything after signing up. Incogni just handles it. So get Incogni for yourself and reclaim your own data. Go to incogni.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to get 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Get your personal data off the market with Incogni. And here's that video I want to show you about how China is totally based, or at least that's what the CCP wants you to think. That in-depth episode is only available on our website, ChinaUncensored.tv. Click here to check it out. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.